Good morning from Zurich. You're listening to Monocle on Sunday with me, Tyler Brûlé. I'm back coming up today here on Dufourstrasse, number 90. Of course, my guest today, Juliet Linley, is here. Also, Grgic. She just ran in the door. So, Juliet, we'll start with you. You're not out of breath. Maybe not. What have you spotted on your pages? There's no highlighters today. So, are there any important stories?
All eyes on Rome. All eyes on Rome. Wednesday afternoon, conclave begins. We will soon know who will succeed Pope Francis.
Okay, and anything else from Rome? No, nothing else.
Oh, well, you can also talk about Pope Trump. Did you see that AI-generated image of himself?
No, we'll talk about that in a moment. We'll also be getting the latest from the Bosphorus.
I'm Hannah Lucinda Smith in Istanbul, and coming up, I'll be talking about the latest earthquake to hit the city, a new round of protests, and an Ottoman painting that's been uncovered and sold at auction in London for £1 million.
Plus, we'll hear from Latika Bourke in Australia. We'll be talking all about, of course, the election. We're also going to have our Nick Manise around in the studio in a moment as well. It's the 4th of May, 2025. Live from Zurich, this is Monocle on Sunday.
Live from Zurich, this is Monocle on Sunday with Tyler Brûlé.
And good morning from Zurich. Sun is shining. It's a little bit muggy out. It's going to rain. Juliet, Gorana, good morning. Nice to see both of you. Let's start with a weather report. That crazy storm last night, just before bedtime. Were you already tucked up in bed at that time?
No, I wasn't crazy, right?
It was crazy because actually the forecast yesterday was a generally nice day. Then it sort of rained a bit. It was on and off. Very nice sunset early evening. And then I didn't see sort of any major weather warnings, but had to almost bring the tablecloths in and everything from outside.
Yeah, you had to bring in the cushions, all sorts of things. It was really gushing with rain.
Yeah. Anyway, but we made it through. Gorana, very nice to
survived,
see you. Good morning.
Here and also survived and equally wasn't prepared for the thunderstorm around 11.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, I believe this is sort of, we've had a little glimpse of summer here in the heart of Mitteleuropa, but it's going to get a bit chillier again this week. But that's fine. Schools are back. All of that doesn't affect us. Hopefully it makes the cafe busier as well. We'll see the return of many of our regulars. But on the topic of regulars, we have our Nick Manise is, of course, in London, our design editor. And we're going to head to Australia in a moment as well. Latika Bourke, of course, regular contributor who is often around the microphone in London. She's in Australia at the moment, of course, editor at large for the Nightly. And Gorana, of course, you're here as well. And I'm just building all of this up because there were, of course, elections in Australia. We, of course, have a winner, Anthony Albanese. Maybe, Gorana, maybe we'll start with you because you're around the table. You've got a view on Australia. Any thoughts on what happened? Because if you're looking at, let's say maybe the external press as much as if you look at the ABC, the Australian, the Sydney Morning Herald, much talk about, of course, that this is, another one of these potentially sort of, fueled by Trump wins for perhaps both the obvious or non-obvious reasons.
Sure. So not just that I have a view, I have an Australian passport and I had an Australian ballot paper, which I sent via post. So hopefully it will count to what is already a pretty set result. And I don't think that once it reaches the Australian Electoral Commission, my little vote is going to do anything in the city of Sydney, where I'm still a registered voter. So hello to the Australian Electoral Commission. If you're listening, it's on the way. Please don't fine me for not voting, because as we know, in Australia, elections are compulsory. Obviously, voting is compulsory. So coming back to your question of what this might mean in the context also of another election in Anglosphere, or in as well another one of these Five Eyes partners. So Canada, Australia now electing or confirming the incumbents to return for another term. Obviously in Canada a little bit different, with Mark Carney having taken over from Justin Trudeau, but in Australia Anthony Albanese's election now is truly a historic one, because it's the first time in 20 years that we have a prime minister who has served full term to be returned into power, and actually first time in over 40 years that Labour prime minister has been returned into office, so into a consecutive term. So truly something for the history books there. I was also looking at all of the different headlines. I really liked Sydney Morning Herald had something along the lines of Alba easy, get getting back. And then there were also references to a lot of tears and beers flowing in both camps, both the Libs or the coalition that lost and now has basically been decimated to only about 30 seats in over 150 strong parliament. So the lower house, which is quite stark given where they've been only 10 years ago when Tony Abbott first took over from the Labour Party. But to get to the bigger picture of what this means in the context of just foreign policy being on the agenda, for sure, Trump returning to the White House hasn't helped, and everything that he has been doing over the past now over 100 days on the foreign policy front has made voters across the Anglosphere, I would say in Canada most acutely, but also in Australia, to question where the world might be headed. And in that context of what we've heard is now chronic uncertainty, right, that governments around the world are dealing with. It seems that they want to give back the kind of reins of power to those who have already been in government rather than try out maybe untested pairs of hands.
Let's head to Canberra right now. Latika Bourke is standing by there for us. Latika, mood in the Australian capital, but yeah, maybe nationwide if you're able to sample it from where you're perched today.
Good morning, Tyler. I'm actually perched in beautiful Sydney. I have not had time yet to stroll down the harbour, though.
The pigeon on the far side of our table couriered over that you were in Canberra. So, hey, listen, I would rather be in Sydney rather than Canberra.
Me
anyway,
too.
Can't blame
I'm going
you,
to Canberra tomorrow.
Very good.
I can give you a dispatch from there next week. Look, Sydney is why I'm here, because the Prime Minister, he lives in an inner city seat. So I have been on the campaign trail for the last 5 weeks, crisscrossing Australia. Tyler, I cannot assure you that they were glamorous flights. We're in charters, but they're not very nice, to put it mildly. And we ended up in Sydney yesterday because the Prime Minister lives here. He stayed at Kirribilli on the harbour last night. He watched the election coverage and then goes to his electorate for his victory speech, and joined up with his team again last night after my work on Channel 7, our parent company for the nightly newspaper. So, Tyler, I guess the mood in Australia is really one of exhale. There's a lot of relief that it's a majority government. It's a huge surprise, and it's quite stunning, the scale of this win. No poll really saw it coming this way. And in fact, last night on a dance floor with the chief Labor strategist, I said, did your track polls show that it would be this big? We're talking a landslide of potentially 90 seats for the government. You only need 76 to govern in Australia. This is huge. And he said not even our track poll had the data this good. So it is somewhat of a stunning result. But it's also a positive result, because in Australia we've had a couple of things happening that this result has stopped in its tracks. One is instability. As you heard there, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese becomes the first Prime Minister in 21 years to do 2 terms back to back. That means somebody who voted for the first time in the election on Saturday has never seen that in their lifetime. So that's extraordinary in itself. The other thing they did was really neutralise extremist parties on the fringe. Now, in Australia, because we have compulsory and preferential voting, you basically have to govern in the centre to win the country. And in the last 2 elections, we've had a splintering of the vote going into what are called teal independents. They're basically quasi-green, progressive Labor, soft kind of independent voters that live in metro cities and sometimes in the regions. And then we had a big green vote. But I think that the war in Israel has really stopped that green vote in its tracks, and the Greens actually lost seats from their high of the last election. And that's being viewed in the country as a very positive development, because we're now kind of going back in time where mainstream never looked so sexy. And I do think, Tyler, that's a big Trump effect.
I want to bring in Nick as well. Nick, I'm not going to ask you to maybe comment on the graphic design, of course, of campaign posters and how this was maybe run from a design perspective. But why not? You were literally around the corner. I'm not sure if you even managed to zip back to Australia to cast your ballot when we were in Jakarta just only last week. But yeah, how have you observed this being in such close proximity over the last 10 days?
I mean, it's a funny one. With Albanese particularly, I remember a few years ago, and Latika can probably weigh on this more than I can, but it was sort of a toss-up between Bill Shorten as Australia's Labor leader versus Anthony Albanese. Shorten initially won, lost an election. Albo comes in, which, and I also just love that about Australian politicians. Albo, you just want to get around the bloke. But Albo comes in, wins an election, wins another one off the back of it. And I think for me as well, I mean, I'm also, maybe this is a little bit shallow, a little bit superficial, but you also want a leader that you can kind of rally behind. And if you compared Albanese to Dutton, Albanese is the guy you want to be stuck at a barbecue talking to, not Dutton. And I also wonder, and I'm curious for Latika's take on this, how much that sort of factors into things. How much, just somebody that appearing a little bit likeable, somebody you might want to spend time with, might want to listen to. How much does that factor into Albanese's win as well?
Look, in Australia, we say it's basically a test of who you want to have a beer with. And so it's not a pint, it's a schooner, who you'd want to have a schooner with or have around to your barbecue. And there's no doubt Anthony Albanese wins that hands down. He's a very sociable character, and he also mingles well with all sorts of streams of society. He gets along very well in a boardroom, just as he does with sports. He absolutely loves sport. He loves tennis. He loves football. He goes to all the games. He's a massive devotee. He also loves a red carpet night. He likes celebrities. He loves politics. Basically, he's just a guy that really enjoys life. And sometimes that's actually been difficult for him as a prime minister. It's come back to bite him, and people say you look like you're having too much of a good time. And he's had to really curtail that. So he gave up alcohol, for instance, since January to do this campaign. He can't go to the football all through the campaign, and one of his teams was playing in a massive game during it, and we were kind of on the trail with him one day, and he's like, I can't have fun in this job, I'm not allowed. So it was a bit of a revealing moment, but to be honest, it is a bit of a litmus test for the Australian people. Is this guy a knockabout? Is he affable? Is he down to earth? Does he not take himself too seriously? If you tick yes to those things, you get a long way across the line in Australia, but it's not that superficial. The main reason why this guy won, and he increased a majority, which also is historic. First-term governments usually don't increase majorities. You usually go back and you lose a majority because of the kind of wear and tear of your first term. The reason he overwhelmingly won is just because the other guy showed up with nothing in his hands at the finish line. And then there was the Trump factor, which really was very big and dominated the first 2 weeks of this campaign. And you put some of these things together, and to me, it is not surprising that this result was this strong. I did actually say to the Prime Minister privately, I interviewed him on his VIP, and I said at the end of that interview, I said, PM, I think this is going to be a majority win for you, and I think they're going to break really late in the last week for you, and you'll be fine, you'll be over the line. And that's exactly what happened. Now, I didn't think it would be this big, but I did actually suspect that this would break in his favour for all of those reasons, and Trump was just number one in my mind at that time when I said that to him.
Gorana, I want to bring you in. You touched on the Five Eyes. I was thinking about this only yesterday. We haven't heard a lot about the Five Eyes, of course. For those not familiar with the term, this is the intelligence community: New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the US, and the UK. The Anglo-sphere of really security intel. If you're sitting in DC at the moment, you see this incumbent win. Australia, of course, is in a big moment of rearming, not just buying, of course, material from the US, potentially a big order on the way for Germany or Japan coming up, amongst other things. How do you view this? Not just if you work for Lockheed Martin or Boeing or others, but also if you're sitting with hopefully a stable chair at the Pentagon.
What I would say here is that when it comes to the alliance and in general Australia's relations with the US, there is a strong bipartisan consensus, and that's sort of ironclad. And I think there was an effort actually from both sides of the political spectrum here when it comes to major parties to make it clear that they will find a way to find a workable relationship with the US administration. Actually, it was quite interesting that at one point in the leaders' debate between Albanese and Dutton, the question of how close who is to Trump came up. And actually, at that point when I think Peter Dutton, who is now also ousted from the parliament as the leader of opposition, which is something that's also quite unprecedented, when he said, well, he never met the man and he saw the writings on the wall that it would be good to not associate himself too much with the Trump administration. Having said that, again, if you just go through the kind of coverage that AUKUS in general gets in Australia, while there are a lot of questions being asked, can Australians trust the United States, especially around Pillar 1, the nuclear subs deal and so on, there are quite some prominent voices of dissent, and I think spearheading that kind of criticism of Australia's approach is one former Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull. He has been asking all these tough questions, but the reply that he gets from both the Labour side of the politics as well as the coalition is that Australia has basically no choice but to stick to the United States, and then makes it more about this being a deal also with the UK again. Coming back to the idea of Anglosphere, but then also talking about making these sort of stronger partnerships with like-minded countries in the region, especially so in the Indo-Pacific. Those would be Japan or South Korea, really focusing on Southeast Asia through various links. So again, the kind of approach to the United States is, of course, a wary one, especially given Trump's trade policy. But we haven't seen a lot of daylight when it comes to the general subscription to alliance still being that main vertical in Australia's foreign policy.
It's just 20 past the hour in most corners of the world where you're listening. We've been on this topic now for 16 minutes. Latika, I want to ask you, does anyone care? Because I'm looking at the front page of an Australian-owned newspaper in the United States, Wall Street Journal. This story is nowhere. And of course, they're running a big, well-oiled newsroom. It's an Australian-owned newspaper or owned by an Aussie. And it's not there. And it reminds me of the start of the week as well. An election in Canada, but it was competing with 100 days of Trump. And it was amazing to watch the BBC, CNN, all of these global outlets. Here's a G7 country, really nowhere. It was so far down the news agenda. So, I think, Gorana, we touched upon it geopolitically. Of course, it matters, of course, within the borders where you are. But is anyone even paying attention in Jakarta, Singapore, or up in Tokyo?
Well, I mean, the reaction from world leaders was very swift, actually. So I do think it's watched at least by governments and fellow leaders, if not the media. I think there is some reason for the rest of the world, particularly the Anglosphere, to care about the results here, because contrasting to what we're seeing in the United States and definitely in the United Kingdom with the local council results and the surge of reform there, we've had quite a different result in Australia. We have had a right-wing party here that's been banking on a similar sort of realignment and hoping that there would be this big divide in Australian society between the progressives in the cities and the suburban and the regional and rural voters who care more about culture and values and cost of living and are more aspirational and hardworking but feel down and out and left behind by the elites. Now, this election, I think, has really, for the first time, shown that maybe the realignment is not necessarily widespread across the Western world. We have compulsory voting, and that does change things. We also have preferential voting, which means no vote gets wasted. That also changes things. But I also do think that the size of this majority shows, actually, if you have centrist government, and there is a centre mood within the public that is cultivated, and there is still in Australia very much so. We don't like extremism here. then actually governing for a centre and governing for a unified country, governing for one country is still possible. And I think this is the first time I've seen this in a result, because I don't think you could say the same for the Canadian result. Tyler, you would know that one a lot more closely, but it did look like that realignment was solidifying in Canada, with the Conservatives picking up seats that usually were working class Liberals. And so I think the Australian result is one to take a bit of notice of, even if the broader media around the world are not necessarily paying attention right now.
Nick, just from your perspective, and I go back to, we were in Jakarta. We had a number, and this is, of course, our listeners have heard about this over the past few weeks. We had our Chiefs conference. It's a focus on entrepreneurship and leadership, and we had probably for the first time really a deployment of Australians, because it was around the corner. But I think there was this curiosity about coming to this sizable neighbor, 280 million plus people. Of course, most Aussies have all spent time in Bali, but I think there was this fascination about going to the capital of Indonesia, and this a little bit of a wow moment as well. That I'm sure, of course, all of our audience know that that of course Indonesia is a sophisticated economy, but there was that sense as well, like, okay, maybe we have to open our eyes a little bit wider. Why is it that such an important capital city, of course, politically, but also economically as well, had not been visited before? And I'm just wondering, how do you sort of see maybe this next phase, clear majority, and of course, at a time when Gorana's talking about this is, Australia starting to arm up. A sense of confidence, perhaps something that Australia has to export soft power wise to the broader neighborhood?
I think this has always been a discussion. I think it will continue to be a discussion. Obviously, we're talking about the Five Eyes there, and obviously the Anglosphere, but the reality is we're so far removed regionally, and you talk about going to Jakarta there, and so many Australians have been to Bali. It seems like so few have actually been to Jakarta, and it was almost a refreshing reminder of this region that we're in, Southeast Asia particularly, and the power of the economies there, the growing economies there, and maybe, and I'm sure this will be on the agenda, but a little bit of a refocusing. I know years ago under Kevin Rudd, there was this massive shift towards China. That's obviously come back. Now with things questionable, tenuous with the US, is there something to be said about, I guess, refocusing our energy on our own neighbourhood? Because you look at all these security alliances we're part of, the Five Eyes, there's a whole thing with the Nine Eyes with Denmark, France, Netherlands, Norway and the like. But really, what are we doing for our own region, and how can we, I guess, perhaps serve and better connect there? And I would be really, really curious, how we start to sink energy into that beyond simply holiday destinations.
Just listeners, Juliet Linley is still here, but we were going to have her talk about the elections in Trinidad, but she's sidestepped that one. We're going to come and talk about the Vatican in a moment. We're going to wrap up on the Australian topic over the next 3 minutes or so. Latika, just quickly for you, if I sort of rewind over, probably like 10, 15 years ago, and I sort of posed that soft power question. Grant, I want to bring you in on this as well. There was that moment where you saw that the ABC and certainly through its various proxies tried to sort of play a role with the Australian, television network, that you would be in Bali, you could be in Langkawi, and Australian television would sort of, pop up. News at the top of the hour, nice documentaries, lots of fluffy animals, and lots of just these sort of traditional, you would say sort of, feel good stories, maybe why you'd want to sort of, spend money, invest in the country, etc. And that's all gone away. I mean, so much of it has been swept away. It's not gone, but you don't see that role. And I mean, I remember being in Sydney just recently, and you talk to a lot of the people at the major organizations saying not just newsrooms have been decimated, that they just don't have the bureaus and the coverage that they used to have in the broader neighborhood, that they used to have their man or woman in Port Moresby. They used to have their person in KL full-time, etc. Those days are gone. That's not just a public sector thing. It's a private sector thing. Is there a new moment when you talk about this? Yeah, sort of mainstream, and sometimes mainstream, of course, does many good things. Does it give Australia confidence to have a bigger voice? And hey, we're all in media, and for it to do so, through the various channels, be the one that you are also working for as well, as much as others.
So interestingly, the ABC, so the equivalent of the BBC, has been the subject of, I guess, one of those culture wars. The right wing hates it. They see it as biased towards the left and they gut it every time they come into power. And then the left usually gets back in and kind of refunds it. We have had cuts to and changes to the contract of the ABC overseas in the Pacific particularly. And also across Asia. And you're right, Tyler, you go to a hotel in Southeast Asia now and you turn it on and you're much more likely to see Chinese state television than Australia. And Australia used to occupy that space. So it's a big own goal from Australia to have withdrawn that. Having said that, Australian media, particularly the ABC, is still, I think, the best read in the Pacific. So it still has a strong presence. And the ABC does invest a lot in Pacific focus news. Where I think you might see a difference is less the media, because as you say, it is a tough business environment and it's an operating environment no one's cracked the secret sauce for, if there is one. But where I think you might see some differences is in kind of soft power programs like sport. So for example, Australia and Papua New Guinea just signed a huge NRL, that's a football sporting code that's very popular in Australia and very popular with Pacific Islanders. And we have a lot of Pacific Islanders coming over or people of Pacific Island descent playing in professional leagues in Australia. So that's going to be a big, big deal. And the Prime Minister himself went over to PNG to launch that, and he's really proud of this initiative. Other things you will see is the private sector like Google and Australian governments and the US government all collaborating to build things like undersea cables to connect the Pacific Islands. So I think you're probably going to not see necessarily the return of the media, but I do think you will see these soft power programs in other more infrastructure ways. And personally, I do think that's a very clever approach, because that's long-term gains that connect us in ways that will endure beyond a cycle of politics that likes or dislikes a public broadcaster.
Latika Bourke in Sydney. Listen, you can stick around if you want. We're going to go for the news headlines back in London with Emma. Nick, don't go anywhere, because we need to talk about, of course, Design Awards, a little event that, of course, we hosted in Paris earlier in the week. But before that, 10:30 and 45 seconds here in Zurich. Emma Nelson is back in London with the news.
Thank you very much indeed, Tyler. Polls have opened in Romania for a rerun of the presidential elections. The first round was annulled on the grounds of Russian interference. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has promised to run a government of efficiency after his Labour Party was returned to power with an increased majority in the general election. Labour had been trailing in the polls until Donald Trump imposed his sweeping round of trade tariffs. Switzerland's government is reportedly examining whether it should arm shepherds to protect them from growing threats from wolves. The number of wolves is rising by about 30% per year. Strict rules currently govern the circumstances in which they may be shot. And researchers in Wales have established that when it comes to farm animals, well, we can all guess which animal has the biggest brains. It was already known that goats can open gates and read human facial expressions. Now we've learned they win in memory and problem-solving tests. Scientists at Aberystwyth University found that goats beat both sheep and alpacas when they assess their ability to understand that objects still exist when they're no longer visible. It's a skill that's useful when navigating dense vegetation or dodging predators. Those are the headlines. Back to you, Tyler, in Zurich.
Not news to us, right, Emma?
Absolutely not. I mean, we all. What I didn't know is that a goat can open a gate.
Oh, no, I thought we had a goat gate opening story a while ago. But anyway, alpacas, come on. I mean, seriously, those big eyelashes, long neck. I don't know how fast the blood gets up to the brain. I don't even know why they're in the running.
You're talking about... I mean, let's be honest about this. The bar is reasonably low, isn't it? If we've got goats trying to beat sheep and alpacas. But it is that thing. If you flutter an eyelash, someone might open the gate for you. The goat has to work a bit harder.
This is true. Okay, listen, Emma, stay there. I think Nick is there. Let's move on to other news. Juliet, we've got Conclave, not just the film, but we have Conclave. By the way, I was spinning around. I think was it? I don't know, Sky or Netflix. That series with Jude Law,
The Young Pope.
Yeah, The Young Pope. Then went into a series as well. Very
Didn't
odd.
watch it.
No.
Very odd.
Very odd.
No.
Anyway.
Will we have a young pope? That's what you're asking me.
Young hot
How
pope.
young and hot?
Yeah, exactly. So that
Here we go, guys.
Can we answer this?
It's Tyler in the Vatican on a Sunday. Can we answer this? Of course not. I am not a cardinal who is going to be even coming near to the Sistine Chapel, and neither are any of the gazillions of press members who are out there spitting out all of their hypotheses and their predictions about who is going to be the successor of Francis. But and if you even want me to start going there, I can tell you who the top runners are. A couple of them are Italian.
There are some Italians in the running.
There are two main ones in the running.
Gorana seems like she's behind you. She's putting the fingers, not giving you the finger, but she's putting fingers up. She's saying two.
The two main ones. Actually, three Italian main ones. If we just want to talk.
I only know about Pizzaballa because of his surname.
Yeah. No, you've got Pizzaballa, who is the patriarch of Jerusalem.
Nick, do you like this name, Pizzaballa?
It's making me hungry.
Versed in Middle Eastern politics, so that would be good if you want to have someone on the throne who knows about his geopolitics. You've got what was until now the number two, the equivalent of the Prime Minister of the Vatican, who would be Pietro Parolin, who's a diplomat who knows a lot of the cardinals who come from rather far-reaching spots around the world, because that was Francis, who liked to go out to places where previous cardinals had not come from, and where often they don't even have a very large Catholic majority. So that would be to his advantage, Parolin's, because he's actually met a lot of them. One of the problems is that a lot of these 133 cardinals who are going to be voting as of this Wednesday afternoon, they don't know each other because they are from such far-flung places. And just dial back, if you want, even 20, 30 years. So many of them were just Europeans. A lot of them were Italian, the cardinals. So they kind of knew each other. They would see each other in their many meetings. There haven't been many of those meetings to bring together these. The other Italian is Matteo Zuppi.
Just quickly, because we should say to our listeners, because, of course, this is a patch you've covered. You are an authority on the Vatican. I'm flying in from a far-flung place as a newish cardinal. What is my sense of arrival? Is there someone with is there a sign, there
arrivals
is
Leonardo da Vinci Airport?
Exactly. And then when I land, is it, an amazing Mercedes E-Class picking me up? Is there red carpet? I'm just wondering.
No, there's no red carpet
how regal is it for these cardinals?
The airports would not be regal. They've been arriving in bits and bobs over these last since before the funeral.
They're flying
which was
the back
Sunday.
of the plane, front of the plane.
For sure. Pope Francis was all about cutting Vatican.
Yeah, I'm sure, but if you're probably far away and no one's looking at your coffers,
you're going to sneak into the first class.
I don't know. Maybe I'm coming from Abidjan or somewhere. I'm not saying that I have to be naughty just because I'm from Abidjan. But anyway,
how many cardinals come from Abidjan? In any case, they are more down to earth than you would have thought. A lot of them were not cardinals until December, when Francis named a whole whack of new ones, including Canadian one. But anyway, we're not going to go down that route. But interestingly,
am I traveling in my full regalia, do you think?
No, you're not traveling in your full on the plane. You're in your sweatpants. You're in your Lulus. Maybe not. But I know you kind of love the idea of them with their little red zucchetto sleeping in first
This is
class.
radio. You've got to paint a picture for our listeners. So, okay. Anyway.
They put on their garb when they go for the official meetings.
That's it.
And they've been having a lot of them. What do you mean that's it? And when they go into the Sistine Chapel, they're wearing them.
Okay.
They're like models of duty. That's basically the look.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
But you know how so many people would like to be Pope, right? In their imagination. Starting with, take a guess.
Donald Trump.
Right. So all of a sudden, a few days ago on Truth Social, he posts a picture of an AI-rendered image of himself as Pope. Imagine Mark Carney putting online a picture of himself as the Dalai Lama.
Right.
Hello. Right. Do things get even more ridiculous? No, I mean, nothing against the venerated
But it was also
retweeted
by official White House channel.
Oh, yes.
Well, right.
Absolutely. And, Caroline Levitt said, he's a staunch champion for Catholics and religious liberties and so on. And the U.S. bishops, they came down hard on him, saying, stop mocking us. This is nothing funny and there's nothing clever about this image. At the Vatican yesterday, in one of the press briefings, Matteo Bruni, the spokesman, he wasn't going to be pulled into the conversation. The Italian press are all over it, saying, how dare he? La Repubblica, he's a pathological megalomaniac. But all of this, just how much influence do you think Trump is going to have on a conclave? Well, you wouldn't imagine very much. But, there are 10 U.S. cardinals. The largest number come from Italy, and I think it's 19. But most importantly, there has been fake news put out there about the conclave regarding Pietro Parolin, the aforementioned one of the front runners. And it's a U.S. CatholicVote.org website. By the way, who's behind it? The Holy See's, the U.S.'s ambassador to the Holy See. And they're kind of trying to say that Parolin has health issues, that he had to be ricoverato, he had to be given medical attention. all of this to put him out as being a weaker candidate, and therefore, I don't know, they're hoping for a far more conservative cardinal.
Remind us, last 3 conclaves, how long were...
2 days.
2 days.
Yeah. But gone are the days when they were sequestered for like weeks on end. I think there was one conclave, I don't know how many hundreds of years ago, where they took a year.
But yeah, listen, if you were, maybe if you were head of comms though for the Vatican, you think maybe let's like stretch this out a little bit, right?
Keep it going.
I mean,
Keep it going.
have a bit of sort of, compelling and compulsive viewing.
But it's not very compelling and compulsive.
Well,
all you've got is the smoke.
I said all cameras like on the chimney.
You've only got grey, white, black. Oh, what color is this? What's going on? That was the biggest thing.
No tricolore.
No tricolore. But bells will ring if the Pope is finally elected.
Okay. Emma, are you there?
I am.
Bells and smells, as she put it.
yeah.
She
Bells
refers to
and
the
smells,
Catholic
I
Church
know.
as bells.
It is all
and
bells
smells.
and smells.
You've got beers and tears in Australia.
Yeah.
Bells
Okay,
and smells
Nick,
in
Emma,
Holy
what else is happening on your side of the channel?
Can
on
I
this
just
fine-
ask a
Go ahead,
question?
Nick.
I'm
Yeah.
a
Outfits.
baptized Catholic man. Can I put my hat in the ring?
I love that you're asking that because actually, the Vatican
just
press
waiting for that
office
question.
put out
celibate,
a
Nick?
list.
Are you
They put out a list of what
Depends
you
who's
need
asking.
to be. I'm not kidding, and it might be because Trump put out this picture of himself. There are so many criteria you have to fit. Yes, you have to be baptized.
Nailed
So
it.
check.
There you go.
Male. Check.
Yep.
Okay.
Sound mind. Not excommunicated. Okay.
It's okay.
But you've got to be a cardinal, though.
We're
You know
starting to get
what?
onto shaky. Do I definitely have to be a cardinal?
You definitely have to be I hate to break it to you.
How many Aussie Cardinals are there? 3? Do we know?
There are a couple. Actually, I read
4
there,
from Oceania. How
there
many
is
Aussies?
one who was actually named by Pope Francis just late last year, I believe, and who is Ukrainian background.
Okay.
Actually,
Can we
cardinal
fast track him?
My school mascot was a cardinal. Is that helpful at all?
Yeah, listen, if we could somehow sort of AI morph you into it, maybe that would work, Nick. Here's a fun fact. It's always amazing how many sort of Catholics come out of the woodwork. I feel like we're actually quite a Catholic organized. We have a lot of
strangely.
Catholics at Monocle. A lot.
No.
Yes, a lot. Yes.
Really?
Yeah, a lot.
Now, what are they doing? They're letting you know that they're going to be heading down to the system.
No, there is a bit of a there's a sizable
wearing
Catholic club,
crucifixes.
but no, also for an organ. I mean, listen, we're very international, etc. But of course, most of our team sits in London. But I'm always amazed how many also Brit Catholics we have as well.
Do they come
in the
out
mix.
and have a show of hands, or how would you know? They come and tell you.
Well,
'Cause
we
you don't wear it
all
on
go
your
to
sleeve.
Easter together, Easter Mass
Exactly.
together. That's it.
Yeah.
We're the sort of the
It
twice a
happens
year
over
Catholics.
Christmas and Easter. We just we find these things out, right? Anyway, Emma, what's making news in the UK?
I'm just still following the Cardinals thing. That's all
Yeah.
I've been focusing on. So it's brilliant how most of the press have now decided to do the hospitality side of the conclave, because this is the first time that they've had to accommodate 120 cardinals who, they'll be jet lagged. They're going to need somewhere to hang their gowns and this, that and the other. There's questions about whether they're allowed fridges in the room. And they're talking about the diet that they're going to be given. They're all going to be given these wonderful Italian dishes. I mean, frankly, I'm thinking about having a sex change so I can go and apply to be a cardinal, because you get the most perfect Roman food. You get pasta, you get soup, you get fruit, which you think is quite plain, but if you're in Rome, it's going to be gorgeous. But they've
Emma,
also refurbished. Go on, sorry, Juliet.
Go. No, they are making an effort to keep the food very simple, because God forbid, imagine there's like a run of the trots and all the cardinals cannot make it to the Sistine Chapel because they are all
Right.
So they've said they're going to keep the food very simple. I mean, I think that perhaps for a Brit that still sounds yummy,
be
but
decent,
like
yeah.
broths and
It's going to be.
vegetables doesn't sound
Okay.
as fabulous as the restaurants
Again,
nearby.
you've had insight. How is the cuisine inside the Vatican?
No, it's incredibly good.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of incredible Italian chefs in there. No, I'm kidding. But you have a lot of nuns doing a lot of the cooking, to be honest.
Right.
But I mean, even at religious schools where we used to like go maybe in Rome and everything, the food was always like really good. You'd have delicious smells, which is the opposite to the British experience, where school lunches are apparently not a great thing until Jimmy Oliver came along, maybe Emma. Or,
And what they're just going to
Emma,
do.
do you have a view on that? School
Do I have a
lunches?
view of school? Yes, they're fine. They're expensive. And they're better than they used to be. They used to be. They're still not as good as what you can eat in Rome. Because if you're a priest coming to sort of watch and hang on, you've got all these restaurants around the Vatican where you can kind of gather and wait it out. And there's these wonderful accounts of priests from Holland enjoying octopus and lasagna and a decent carbonara, and so regardless as to what's happening inside the conclave, where they've all got these lovely little spruced up rooms and this delicious simple cuisine that they're enjoying, that the priests outside can really go to town on the rabbit.
The rabbit. The Vatican recipe for.
Okay, while we contemplate, Desi, I'm going to fly. I wonder how many cardinals are coming from Switzerland as well. Of course, the Swiss Guard are also very important. This is sort of a big moment for this country as well. Of course, lots of striped pantaloons will be seen. Of course, over the coming days. Yeah. But Nick, just very quickly, speaking of striped pantaloons, can you tell us a little bit about what happened earlier in the week? Paris feels like was pre-Jakarta. Anyway, we had a small celebration in Paris, which was to thank and of course to acknowledge part of the core of our 50 winners of our design awards. And what unfolded?
Well, we had a lovely evening of drinks, with some of our 50 winners. So the May issue of Monocle magazine, there is our Monocle Design Awards, 50 outstanding entries, I think, from 27 countries, editorially selected. So it's a process whereby we've got something like 30 odd correspondents around the world, and they all kind of feed back into yourself, me, Andrew Tucker, our editor in chief as well, and we build a list, I guess, of it's part inspiration, part recognition, but I guess outstanding works of design across everything from transport to public space to furniture to product design to interiors, architecture, and the whole idea is that we're kind of benchmarking the best and the newest, but also things that have stood up to the test of time. So we had a moment.
You're talking about a design conclave.
A design conclave, exactly. And we sort of had a mini one, as you mentioned, in Paris on Monday night. So we had 7 winners from France, which is a perfect excuse to kind of bring everyone together in our new-ish Paris outpost. But we also had people come in from across Europe and even from Mexico as well. So we had a host of our winners. Manuel Cervantes, the Mexican architect, who's our residential architect of the year. We had representatives from Air France who went back to back for the first. One of our winners going back to back for the first time. We had an Indonesian.
That's not just the seating on the aircraft is back to back. No.
An Indonesian representative from a company called Sungo, who's doing amazing things with recycled materials and also making sensational furniture off the back of that. So it was a moment. We didn't have a puff of smoke whereby we had a grand winner, but it was 50 winners across the board doing outstanding works. I mean, was there any? You helped pull together the top 50. Was there a standout candidate for you? Somebody that would have got that puff of coloured smoke?
Oh, well, listen, I talked about a tricolore, but maybe a tricolore. As I said, you mentioned Air France. I think what they've done with their new La Première cabin is great because it speaks of so many things that we like. When it comes to design, it's not sort of just changing something for the sake of it. This was a great evolution. It's an outstanding piece of work in terms of how do you make the most of, by aviation standards, not a small space. There's quite a few meters devoted to just 4 passengers who'll be flying in 777s, maybe A350s as well. But I think that to me was really one of the outstanding things. And it does, I think, what good design has to do as well. It is flying a flag. It is proud of where it comes from. And as you said, France, pulled out in the lead. It was the most awarded nation as well. Just, Nick, we've got late breaking news right now coming in from Juliet on the number. Everyone's waiting for this. How many cardinals from Switzerland?
Grand total of, wait for it, 2. One is the former Bishop of Basel, Kurt Koch, and the other is a Vatican
What's his name again?
Kurt Koch.
Okay, yeah.
And the other is Vatican diplomat Emil Paul Czernik from Valle.
Okay.
Valle, very Catholic.
Were either of them Swiss guards?
No,
that's a whole other show.
But I can apply for that, can't I?
Have you got Swiss
guard?
No, you
passport?
cannot. No, you cannot
Nick,
apply. You have. Do you have to still be Catholic? Yes,
you have to be Catholic.
You have to be
Swiss.
But what was the
minimum height requirement? I didn't want to say that.
Okay, height requirement. You'll be all right.
Fine, yeah.
Yeah, and
my mum says I'm 6'2".
You've got to have a parish priest saying that it is true that you go to church every Sunday.
I think we could make that work.
And you have to be willing to earn €1,500 or something a month, which is not bad, but for Swiss kids, it's not
that's
a
like
lot.
it's free room and board. And listen, it's all about the outfit for you, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm hanging with the boys, aren't I? This sounds great.
No girls, for sure.
Hang with the boys, and the nuns are there on standby. Listen, let's head to Istanbul because our correspondent Hannah Lucinda Smith is standing by for us. Good morning, Hannah. I want to just maybe start off with we've been talking a lot about, of course, the Australian elections. Any thoughts on relations between Ankara and Canberra? Most welcome. But actually, more when we talk about, of course, the relationship between, of course, the Patriarch sitting in Istanbul and how closely is this actually followed by the community in Istanbul? What's going to be happening in the Vatican?
Yeah, well, of course, I mean, there are a sizable number of Christians here in Istanbul. Of course, this used to be Constantinople. It used to be the seat of, in fact, still is actually the seat of Eastern Christianity officially. But most Christians here are from the Orthodox faith. There are some Catholics, mostly they come from kind of like Levantine Turk background. So these are people in the Ottoman Empire, from Italy, from France, from other places who came and settled in the Ottoman Empire. So there is, some Christians here who are, of course, interested. I think, of course, globally, whether you're a Catholic or not, of course, it's a massive, massive event, something that everyone's interested in. But yeah, I think certainly here in Turkey, it's a very, very small community.
Let's talk and rewind. This, as I was saying a little bit earlier, Hannah, it's incredible when you have whatever it's 100 days of a presidency, etc., and also depend on what news outlets you look at. Of course, you had an earthquake in Turkey, and yes, I have to say, if you were maybe tuned to some outlets, it was there as a breaking news story, but then disappeared very quickly. But of course, it is obviously longer lasting when you're closer to ground zero. Maybe just how is this? I mean, as always as well, how is this played out both politically and of course to the broader public as well?
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, like I said, this earthquake that we had here in Istanbul on the 23rd of April, so a couple of weeks ago now, it was a big one. It was 6.2. It's certainly the biggest I've ever felt here, and It really was terrifying. It went on for 13 seconds. There was a huge amount of shaking. The part of Istanbul that I'm in wasn't actually the worst affected over on the other side. I'm on the Asian side. So it was over on the European side where it was really felt. And, it's just over 2 years since those huge, absolutely catastrophic earthquakes in the south of Turkey. And the memories of that are really, really fresh. And for a few days after that earthquake here in Istanbul a couple of weeks ago, there were people sleeping in the parks. This is how scared people are and how little people trust the buildings here in Istanbul. Now, as you say, depending on what news channels you looked at, there were different interpretations. Obviously, the Istanbul mayor, Ekrem İmamoğlu, was arrested at the end of March and he's still in prison. And one of the things that he was trying to do, particularly after 2023, was really try to up earthquake preparedness here in Istanbul. But if you look at the pro-Erdogan channels, they sort of try to lay all the blame at İmamoğlu's feet. They will say that it's bad leadership here in Istanbul that's the reason that it's not as prepared as it should be. In fact, there's blame at all levels and in all parties. It always turns into this kind of political punching bag. But when you really dig down into it, there's corruption at every level and within every party. And that's what's contributed to this complete lack of preparedness here in Istanbul and right across Turkey.
Let's just go back to, of course, the jailed mayor of Istanbul as well, because we had May 1st. There was, even if you went to corners of Zurich, there were people, spray painting buildings and throwing stones at the security forces, etc. There was a much bigger mobilization of security forces, of course, in Istanbul and elsewhere in Turkey on May 1st. And I'm wondering how this unfolded, and I guess clearly, obviously, everyone, or at least on the government side, ruling government side as well, obviously very braced, knowing that, of course, things flared up a few weeks ago with the imprisonment. But what happened earlier in the week?
Yeah, of course. Well, never really need an excuse to go out and do a protest on May the 1st. And that's true here in Istanbul as well. May the 1st has always been this kind of scene for leftists and for trades unions, students to come out. And in the past, we're talking in the 1970s, that's, been the scene of real, fatal violence. So it's always been a kind of tense day here in Istanbul. For several years now, access to Taksim Square, the main square of the city, has been completely cut off. So, this year in particular, Taksim was kind of surrounded by, just layers and layers of barricades, police everywhere, people living in those neighborhoods because couldn't even really go out their houses. All the public transport stopped because the authorities knew that this was going to be a focus again for protests over the arrest of Ekrem İmamoğlu, the Istanbul mayor. And indeed, that's what's happened. Even though there's this kind of long-running, widespread ban on public gatherings, even though Taksim is closed, there were groups of students and trade unionists who tried to gather and tried to walk towards Taksim, and they were met pretty instantly and extremely brutally by the police. There were videos that I was watching of, one student in particular sort of being forced down to the ground, the policeman putting his knee on the back of his neck to restrain him. But unfortunately, these are scenes that we're sort of very, very used to here in Turkey, and particularly in Istanbul. It's been a creeping thing really over the past 10 years, but particularly, since the coup attempt in 2016 and the state of emergency that was introduced after that, really any excuse to crack down on public gatherings, be they gay pride, be they protests, be they anything that the government does not want, they get cracked down on pretty soon. And so it was again on Thursday.
And at the top of the program, you teased us with a story on a slightly lighter note, which, of course, is the sale of an artwork. I love the name of the piece, "Preparing Coffee," very appropriate for a Sunday morning. Listen, art is changing hands all the time. But what was significant about this?
Yeah, so this is a painting by Osman Hamdi Bey, who is really the kind of iconic painter of the Ottoman era. If you probably have seen some of his paintings and just don't know who painted it. He did a very famous one of kind of Ottoman guy in a white turban looking at a tortoise. But he was really famous for kind of capturing these images of Ottoman life. He trained in Paris, so he brought this very Western style back to the Ottoman Empire, and he's really become iconic. But this painting in particular, it's called "Preparing Coffee." As you say, it's this sort of really kind of nice Sunday scene, and a scene that you still see in Istanbul today, actually, the way that they, prepare the coffee in the, small coffee makers. It went missing or didn't surface, let's say, for more than a century. It was in the hands of private collectors, being sold privately, and this is the first time in more than a century that it had come to public auction. So we got to see this painting again. It went to an anonymous bidder for £1 million. So a really, really high sum. I think that sort of reflects just what high esteem Osman Hamdi Bey is held in, both as an artist but also as a kind of documenter of Ottoman life.
Hannah Lucinda Smith, our correspondent for us in Istanbul. Thank you very much for that. Juliet, any sort of hiding paintings, anything fall behind your sofa?
Any what?
Paintings and any artwork. You think, God, that would just be, need to trot that out to pay for the kids' education. No.
It's so funny. I was just watching this on Apple, and it's called Our Friends and Neighbors.
Oh yes, yeah.
Have you heard of it?
Yeah, we were thinking about tuning in. Maybe it's one for. I'm caught on Yellowstone. I'm sort of I'm way behind.
He steals pieces of art from his friends and replaces them with fakes, and no one would ever know.
Okay,
haven't done that.
Yeah. Emma, anything behind your sofa?
Tons.
I mean, lots of things. I'm talking about artwork.
Tons. Actually, no. Nick Manice has just said there is some. Yes, there's a little bit, but we sort of keep it quiet and we just dust it gently and hope that one day we don't need to call upon it. But you need something that makes you smile. I've got very much into French cartoon advertising posters from the 1950s.
I like this.
I like the sound of this.
Fun. Yeah, I'll send you some pictures. They're quite fun. They keep you happy. They keep you smiling. The one thing, I have a giant Orangina advert poster from the 1960s, and he makes me smile every day.
I think actually we need to bring some Orangina back into the kitchen. I think
Do you remember?
We might have it. We might have it in Paris. But
remember Orangina? Shake the bottle, wake the taste. Do you remember that one?
Absolutely.
French Open.
Yeah, and it was one of these sort of cultural imports into Canada. I think we had it in Quebec first before it went elsewhere in Canada. But now Orangina, Japanese owned.
Amazing.
Oh no, really?
Yeah, well, don't say that.
Why?
It's great that it's Japanese owned. I believe. I think it's part of Suntory.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, we're fine with that. A little Orangina with your hibiki, maybe. Could be
Absolutely,
nice. Maybe
but does it
not.
still have
Maybe
the bottle?
Not.
It needs the bottle.
Yes, it needs, of course, the iconic bottle. Going very, very quickly. Everyone has to do it in 20 seconds or less. Nick, I'm coming to you in a moment as well. Anything on the geopolitical horizon? Any major conferences? Things that we have to be aware of that are coming up? I know we've got. Obviously, I mean, it's not so. Well, it is geopolitical. We got the G7 in Canada in a few weeks. But anything that you're heading to that we should know about and tune into?
Well, not immediately this month, but next month, NATO summit will take place in Den Haag, so I'll be there. But it's late June. But in terms of geopols, I think it's all Trump all the day, all the time. So of course, we didn't have a chance to talk about at all the deal that was spent on Ukrainian minerals and who's the winner or loser, or are both.
There's a whole week of programs
exactly,
where we can
but we'll be keeping an eye on trade stuff because some of the negotiations are ramping up.
Nick, you've got 10 seconds. Tell me anything coming up. Where are you?
I'll be in Venice next week. The Biennale kicks off, and I cannot wait. And that is, in many ways, a geopolitical gathering. I mean, you've got the world's best architects talking about the problems facing their countries.
Juliet, you'll be on Conclave Watch on Wednesday?
Absolutely. I'll be standing behind Vatican walls.
Very good. Juliet, Linley, Gorana, Grgic, also Emma Nelson, thanks very much. Also, big thanks to Nick Moniz, Latika Bourke also for us in Sydney, Hannah Lucinda Smith in Istanbul. It's Desiree Badley's birthday today. Happy birthday, Desi. So wonderful to have you here on this day. Also, big thanks to Mariella Bevan back in London. I'm Tyler Brûlé. I am back from Stockholm next week. We will speak to you then. Have a good week. Bye-bye.